Alright guys, welcome to the part 2 of this balloon pop app that we have been building. If you have followed through in part 1, you should have successfully built your interface and you are ready to carry out the actual coding. Like I've always said, the designer window will take you to the interface and the blocks button will bring you here to the blocks coding area. So I'm just going to guide you through all the step-by-step procedure that you need to know in creating yours. The first thing we are required to do is to create three very important global variables. I have explained our variables before now in my other videos. You can do well to watch other videos and you will understand what variables are all about. So we initialize global variable called random number to 1, score to 0, and then we will also initialize level to 1. Let me explain quickly. The random number is initialized to 1 because we want to pick any random number between 1 and 3, which is for our balloon 1, balloon 2, and then balloon number 3. And then the score is initialized to 0 because at the beginning of your game you want to have a score of 0. And then we are initiating our level to 1 because at the beginning you want to start from level 1. Alright. As soon as the start button is clicked, we want to set the clock timer .enable to true. We want to set the start button to false. We also want to set the start button .visible to false, and then we also want to set our restart .visible to false, our restart .enable to false, and then the game over .visible to false as well. And we want to set the level to 1. We also want to set level.text to have a text displayed as level 1, and that is why we have the block called the join, and we're joining a text which is going to be level, as you can see, with the get global level variable. This will join the two components together and that will give you the level on your screen. Okay, the next thing we are looking at is the clock1.timer. The clock1.timer is like the guy in control of everything happening in your game. So once the clock1.timer is enabled, as you can see in our start button, once you click on the start button, we enable that clock 1, and then once it is enabled, we want to set our global random number to pick any random integer from 1 to 3. If you have more than 3 balloons, you can set it to as many balloons as you have, but it has to always be between 1 and the number of balloons that you have. Right now we have just 3 balloons, and that is why we set it to pick between 1 and 3, which means we want any random balloon to drop at any given time. Okay, the next important thing is your if condition. If the number that is selected at random is balloon 1, we want to set balloon 1 image sprite.enable to now be true. We want it to become visible, and then if for any reason it is not 1 and it is 2, we want to go ahead and do the same thing to set image sprite2 to enabled and the .visible to true. Lastly, if it is not 1 and it is not 2, then it has to be 3, and we will set image sprite3 .enabled to true, .visible to also true. When these conditions have been met, we have the next if statement that says if get score is equal to 50. If we pop the balloons and our score gets to 50, we want something to happen. We want the speed at which the game is played to increase from 25 to 35. We want to set the level to level 2 instead of level 1, and then we want to also have the text to display that. If the score gets to 100, we want to change the speed from 35 to 45. This is our own little way of ensuring that the difficulty level of the game continues to increase, and that is what makes the game to be very interesting. Alright, Next, we are going to be looking at what happens each time you pop each balloon. We are going to be pulling out the block that says when image sprite 1. So next we want to look at what happens every time we click on each balloon or we pop each balloon. And the block you need is for you to get the block that says when image sprite 1 dot touched x y do. The first thing we want to do is to set our score to add 1. So every time you pop a balloon, your score increases by 1. Alright, and then we want to set the score.text to now have the updated score of +1. And the next thing we want to do is to set the image sprite1.y to 10. We want to set the image sprite 1 dot enable to false and then dot visible to false. What this means is that as soon as you pop the balloon, we want the vertical position of that image or that balloon to return back to position number 10 on your y-axis, and then we also want it not to be enabled anymore, and we don't want it to be visible. We want to have that effect like it disappeared from the screen, it has been popped. Alright, we'll repeat the same procedure, but this time around for image sprite 2. Every time you pop the second balloon, your score should increase by 1, and then it should be displayed. And then you want to also set the new position for the y-axis of that balloon to 10, and then you want to make it no longer visible. That is why the dot visible is set to false, dot enabled is also set to false. We repeat the same procedure for image sprite 3, and then finally we are going to be looking at what happens when any of the balloons should touch the edge of the screen. By the edge we mean the bottom of our screen. What is going to happen is our score will be set to 0 at this point, which means we have lost the game. And then we are going to set image sprite 1 the position to 10, the y position to 10, and then dot enabled to false, dot visible to false. Image sprite 2 also the same thing applicable for image sprite 3, and then the clock 1 dot timer enabled, the timer should no longer function, so we'll set it to false. And then the game over dot visible, remember in our design window we set the dot visible of the game over label to false. We unchecked it. Here now, once the balloon has dropped to the bottom of the game and we need the message to be displayed that the game has come to an end, the dot visible would now be set to true, and then the restart button also will become visible and it will also become functional. That is why the dot enabled is also set to true. This is what is going to happen if it is balloon number 1 or image sprite 1 that touches the bottom first. If it is balloon number 2 that hits the bottom, we are going to repeat the same set of blocks and the game will come to an end. Game over will be displayed and a restart button will pop up for you if you want to restart the game. The same thing is applicable if balloon number 3 hits the ground first. And as soon as the restart button becomes visible, we want certain things to happen. So we are going to be using the block that says when restart button dot click, set the score to 0, set the global score, which is the variable itself, to also 0, and then set clock 1 dot timer enabled to true. We want the timer to begin to function now, and then set the game over dot visible to false. Since you are restarting, you no longer want the game over to be displayed, so we set it to false, and then set the restart button dot visible to false, restart button dot enabled to also false. What this means is that as soon as you click on the restart button, once the game has restarted, you no longer want game over to be displayed on your screen, and you also do not want the restart button to still be showing there. Why are you restarting if you have already restarted? That is why we are setting all of this to false. The only thing we are setting to true is our clock 1 dot timer enabled, and I have earlier explained that this is the guide that controls the whole activities of the game. Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of this episode. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video across. Thank you.